The Family History of White Wolf, also known as Matthew Bradley, written and narrated by Marion Jasper. The Branvolds came to America from a poverty-stricken area of Scandinavia in 1810. Lars and Ingrid were second cousins, but they fell in love and were determined to marry. Their families were not pleased, as they felt that the family connection between them was too strong. Regardless of the opposition, when they had both reached the age of 21, they married, but were ostracized by their families. Dire warnings of mentally retarded children were shouted at them whenever they were seen, and this eventually spread to where Lars worked at a local farm and where Ingrid had employment in a small textile factory. They had managed to save a little money, and one of Ingrid's elderly aunts felt sorry for them and left them a small amount of money in her will, much to the disapproval of both families. It was a godsend, as both had lost their jobs because of the adverse comments which were being bandied around. "There is only one thing that we can do," said Lars one evening. "We must leave this area and try to start again somewhere far away. Many are starting up in America. Do you think that we have enough to get there? Nobody would know us, and nobody would think that our marriage is anything other than normal," said Ingrid. "Is it very difficult to get there? We would have to learn English. Would that be so difficult?" "I hadn't really thought about going that far, but it does sound interesting. I know that they are advertising for housemaids in New York. I'm sure I would be able to get work there. I'll have to see how much it would cost us to get there and what we would need to do so. I'll get in touch with who is advertising and see what I can find out. At the moment we have nothing to lose, as we have already lost it," said Lars. Lars smartened himself up the following day and travelled to the main town and found the office where they were recruiting for America. Lars was not completely happy with what was being offered, but he felt that he had no choice. "You have been a farm worker then," said the rather sullen-looking gentleman. "I'm sure that would be very useful. And your wife has worked in the textile industry. I'm not sure that is something that is readily needed at present, but if she is capable of keeping a tidy house, then I feel she could be well employed." "If we are heading for New York, is there any farming around there?" asked Lars. "Not in New York, but there are growing areas nearby," said the man. "Does that mean that my wife and I would be separated during working days?" asked Lars. "It depends on where you would be working. If you are happy to take any form of employment, then we may be able to find you work within the city," said the man. "What about living accommodation?" asked Lars. "Initially, you will be housed in one of our hostels until we can find exactly what you are suited to," said the man. "How much is that going to cost us?" said the ever-practical Lars. "How much have you got?" asked the man. Lars was wise enough to only say less than a quarter of what he had, and the man said that he should talk it over with his wife and return the following day with the money, and he would then receive details of their passage to New York. Slowly he made his way home thoughtfully. He was not entirely convinced that they were making the wisest of moves, but his reticence was really because of the gentleman that he had seen. Ingrid was keen to know how the interview had gone, and Lars told her of his unease with the company who were offering a new life in America. "I do not trust that we will get what is being offered. I think that they will take our money and we will be left stranded somewhere that we have no knowledge about," said Lars. "I think that we are bright enough to make our own way to America, and we have enough money to give us a good start there. What do you think?" asked Ingrid. "We have nothing else to occupy ourselves at present, so we can start tomorrow and find our own way to the promised land," smiled Lars. "Perhaps I could come with you," said Ingrid. "You know that we create attention when we are together," said Lars. Ingrid pouted sadly. She knew that their appearance was quite startling, as they both had extraordinarily fair hair. almost white, with just a slight hint of yellow. They also did look alike. "We could always say that we are brother and sister," said Ingrid sadly. "We are too well known around here. It will be different when we get to America," said Lars gently. "I could always try to darken my hair," whispered Ingrid. "I love you the way you are," said Lars, and he kissed her gently. Ingrid packed a bag for Lars. He would be away for a while sorting out their passage to America. "I'm not sure how long I will be away, but you can rest assured that I will do the best I can for us," said Lars. "Please be careful. You know that docksides can be very dangerous places," said Ingrid. "I shall go to the bookshop in town and get some books on how to speak English." "You'll probably find that there will be many people on the ship who speak English, so if you get yourself a good start, the rest should come easily," said Lars. He was back within the week, and he smilingly told Ingrid to pack what she needed, as they would be leaving for America in 2 weeks. It had not cost as much as he had thought, although he emphasized that their passage was not luxurious, and they would have to share with many families aiming for a new life in America. "We really have nobody to say goodbye to here," said Ingrid sadly. "But we have each other, and we are going on an adventure. Do you think that we will get work when we arrive?" "We have a little money to keep us when we get there, which is probably better than many of those travelling with us," said Lars. "How have you got on with learning English?" "It seems a rather difficult language to learn. It is not as straightforward as some languages, but we will have time on board to learn," said Ingrid. "We can practice together," said Lars, and they did at every opportunity. They had very little to pack, just their clothes and a few personal possessions. They thought about what they might need to eat, and had been told by the shipping company what food would be most useful for the long journey. The shipping company were supplying the basic needs, but should the journey take longer than anticipated, then food might be a problem. "It seems that most of our belongings are flour, eggs, bacon, and not much more," said Ingrid. "Will it be enough for our survival?" "Perhaps we could get some fruit. Probably apples would be the best, if we can find them," said Lars. "We can get those as they are in season. We could take a few pears and some plums, but they do go off quite quickly," said Ingrid. "Well, we'll eat them first," smiled Lars. When they reached the port in Bergen, Ingrid felt dismay when she saw the ship that they were to sail on. It looked a little dilapidated, and when they were shown to their quarters below decks, it was all that Ingrid could do not to cry. She wondered how they were going to survive the weeks ahead of them. They were lucky, as there was a very homely woman in nearby quarters. She had 4 children, but appeared to have no husband. "Don't worry, dearie, it will be fine. We'll get there in one piece," she said, patting Ingrid on the shoulder. She was speaking in English, which surprised both Lars and Ingrid. She could see that they only understood a little of what she was saying, and she laughed and said that she would help them whilst on the journey, and so would her children. Over the course of the following weeks, Lars and Ingrid learned English from Mrs. Henriksen and her children. It may not have been grammatically correct, but it was enough for them to feel confident about their arrival in New York. Mrs. Henriksen had lost her husband, who had been Norwegian, but somehow she had managed to survive and travel to Bergen with her children, working her way around, taking washing and cooking if she was lucky. She had saved enough to get their passage and a little extra for when she arrived in America. She also had no idea what she would be doing when she got there, but they decided that once there, they would stick together until they were well settled. "You're a very handsome couple," said Mrs. Henriksen. "Your colouring is outstanding. It's unusual for you both to have the same colouring." They felt confident enough to tell her of their past. "Good heavens, second cousins are nothing to be ashamed of. You should see what some families get up to. It's disgusting, and the children carry on the same way. Your children will be perfectly normal, and they will take after you both and be beautiful. Nobody would take any notice of your family relationship where you are going. Most marriages aren't proper marriages, At least you have done everything properly, said Mrs. Henriksen. The journey was arduous, and several people succumbed to seasickness, and sadly some died. But Lars, Ingrid, Mrs. Henriksen and her children survived. They had been intelligent enough to bring what was needed to keep them fit and healthy. What they did not have, Mrs. Henriksen did, and vice versa. They looked after one another and were lucky that such a friendship had taken place. Shakily they disembarked in New York and made their way to a cheap boarding house that the sailors had directed them to. It was small but clean and run by a husband and wife who initially looked at them warily. 3 of the children were in one room, Mrs. Henriksen and her daughter in another, and Lars and Ingrid had the luxury of privacy and a proper bed. The owner's wife looked at them and said that she thought that what they would all like could probably be a bath. I don't wish to offend you, but I know what the journey is like to get here, and the first thing that I wanted was a nice hot bath. And I'm sure that the children need it more than you do, she said, smiling. We have a room downstairs where we can set them up. That would be wonderful, said Ingrid in broken English, and Mrs. Henriksen said that her children could definitely do with a good wash. 2 baths were set up, and the children were dealt with first, and they were then refilled, and Mrs. Henriksen and Ingrid swiftly disrobed and sank into the warm water with sighs of pleasure. Finally a bath was refilled for Lars, and he could be heard making even louder sounds of pleasure. The children were already in their nightclothes and sitting at the table eating their first decent meal in weeks. Ingrid and Mrs. Henriksen dressed and came into the dining room. We had not expected such service, said Mrs. Henriksen to the owner and his wife. We thought that we would all have to go out and find food. We know what the journey is like to get here, and we are pleased that we have decent people under our roof. Some come here, and they are so impoverished that they steal from us, and we understand that, as some of the agents take their money and give nothing in exchange. We can see that you have all been shrewd enough to steer clear of agents, said the owner. I did see an agent, but I did not feel happy with what he was telling me, and also asking me how much money I had, said Lars, who was beginning to master the English language extremely well. Around the dining table that evening there were many discussions regarding any possible employment that could be available to them. There isn't much farming work around here, said Dave Poole, the owner, but workers are always needed at the docks, and there could also be driving work around. Can you drive a carriage or wagon? I have driven wagons on the farm and into a town. I'm sure that I could manage around New York, said Lars. Ingrid was following the conversation closely. She understood what was being said, but she still had not gained the courage to speak English to anyone other than Lars, Mrs. Henriksen and her children. Well, my dear, said Shirley Poole to Ingrid, what are you good at? Ingrid looked at Lars to help her, but Dave Poole gently said, No, my dear, you tell us. It is the only way that you will learn. And you are amongst friends here. We won't laugh at you, and we will set you straight if you make a mistake. Ingrid frowned, and Lars translated exactly what Dave Poole had said to her. She smiled gratefully at him and started talking. I work with textiles, helping to make coats mainly. I'm sure I could make other things also, said Ingrid falteringly. If you are good, then you will always find work. There are many dressmakers in town, and there is one that employs many workers in one big room, although the hours are very long. But it could do you to start with, said Shirley. Now, Mrs. Henriksen, said Dave, I know that you have survived against many odds, so I am thinking that you can turn your hand to many things. Yes, I have kept food in my children's mouths by taking on whatever work I could find. I seem to have mostly ended up washing other people's dirty clothes. All my children have helped me in so many ways. They have helped with the washing. They have swept floors and helped to wash them. In fact, the time on board ship was quite a rest for us all. But we don't mind hard work. However, I would like my children to do better than that. I know that my eldest would like to work on the land, and the next would like to help build houses. My daughter could go into service, there is no shame in that, and all board and lodging go with that. The youngest has no clear idea of what he would like, but he is young, and there is time for him to sort out his future. In the meantime, he can help me, as he has been doing for a long time now," said Mrs. Henriksen. "Well, Mrs. Henriksen, we will help in whatever way we can," said Dave. "Do you help all your tenants find employment?" asked Lars. "Yes, we do mostly, and that is because those who come here have not arrived through agents. They all seem to be people who are shrewd enough not to have been caught by them. We are no longer on the agents' lists, as we would not fleece our tenants and pay the agent for the privilege of doing so. We are therefore not recommended by them, but by some of the sailors who recognise decent people when they see them," said Dave. "Our reputation is good, and our recommendations are often taken up." "Do you have many other guests?" asked Lars. "Just a couple, and one works at driving and the other is in an office at the docks," said Shirley. "They are both saving to bring their wives and families over here. I always feel for those who must be separated from their loved ones. You are lucky that you have one another." "We must start looking for work tomorrow," said Lars. "I would suggest that you rest tomorrow and sort out your clothes, and Shirley and I will spend the time putting the word around that we have some decent people who are not afraid of work. We'll see what we can come up with, but we make no promises," said Dave. For the following 6 months, they all stayed at the Pools boarding house. Lars got work at the docks. It was hard, but paid well. Ingrid found employment at the large sewing room. It was depressing, but returning each day to the household really helped to cheer her up. Mrs. H, as she was now affectionately known, not only helped the Pools around the boarding house, but went to other households to help with the washing and cleaning. She often took her children with her, and they also helped with her workload. Her eldest son, Martin, found work with Lars at the docks, but they both always looked for driving jobs. And one day Lars was introduced to the manager of the Kempston Shipping and Distribution Company. After some discussion, Lars was offered driving and delivery work, and he quickly said that Martin would be very helpful to him. The manager smiled and agreed, and so they both began their journey to a better life. Dave Poole had been told of accommodation that could be interesting to both families. It was on 2 levels, each set out as independent units. It was very dirty, and the smell was appalling. But they all could see that with a little work it would be ideal for them all. It was very near to the Poole boarding house and to Ingrid's place of work. They decided that instead of living separately, they would make the living quarters downstairs and the sleeping upstairs. The downstairs kitchen was large enough to take a table, and it had one room that was a good size for a sitting room. The room on the other side of the kitchen could be used by Mrs. H for the washing that she was taking in. Upstairs the kitchen was small, but they were going to use it as a washroom, and it would be useful for hot water. Lars and Ingrid were to have the large bedroom to the left of the washroom, and the 3 boys would share another large room to the right, and then there was a smaller room which would accommodate Mrs. H and her daughter Ruby. There was a small passageway outside, which Lars felt could be used to grow 1 or 2 vegetables, and he was going to make gates so that they would have no intruders. It took them a week to clean and thoroughly remove the bug infestation. The Pools had extra beds in their loft, and they loaned them to Mrs. H and Lars. This meant that they only needed another 2 beds, and Mrs. H managed to procure an old table and adequate chairs. Somehow bedding was not a problem, and Ingrid wondered how Mrs. H had come by it. Gradually items appeared to make the place comfortable and homely. Ingrid cried with pleasure on the day that they moved into their own home. It was clean, neat, tidy, and very homely. She felt that at last she did not have to worry about what anyone thought about her, and everyone treated them in such a friendly manner. As it was becoming dusk on the first day, Lars closed the gates, but a few minutes later someone could be heard calling out a name and knocking on the gate. "Mr. Bradley, are you there? I have some goods for you," said a delivery man. Lars frowned, as the name was called again. "Mr. Bradley, can you open the gate?" Lars moved towards the gate and slowly opened it. He was faced with a man carrying a box which was full of linen, and it had come from the Kempston's manager with a note which hoped that they would not be insulted and felt that they could accept the offering. The box was labelled to Lars and Ingrid Bradley, and it was from that moment that the Brandvolds became the Bradleys. They did not mind, as it was a much easier name for people to remember. "I think that any children that we have should also have English names," said Ingrid. He looked closely at Ingrid and smiled. "You're going to have a child, aren't you?" "Yes, I believe that I am. I'm not too sure yet. Well, I am really," said a very confused-sounding Ingrid. "At least we now have somewhere nice to bring up a child," said Lars. "I know that you really would like to work on the land, Lars, and I hope that by having a child it won't take that dream away," said Ingrid. "No, I'll always have that dream, and I will achieve it some day. We'll work towards that, and we will get some of our own land eventually. When we have enough, we will travel to where we can breathe in the fresh air and plant and grow anything that we want. It will take time, and I am not unhappy in what I am doing at present. This is a country where you can reach all goals," said Lars. When Mrs. H. was told that their name was now Bradley and that they were going to become parents, she was delighted and said how lucky it was that there were plenty of babysitters in their house. "You'll have to give up your job now," said Lars. "I'll be able to work from home just like Mrs. H. does," said Ingrid. They all settled into happy lives, and one of their weekly practices was to sit and read a newspaper, which not only increased Lars's and Ingrid's knowledge of the English language, but it also helped Mrs. H. and her children to become more proficient. It was something that they all enjoyed, and it also kept them up to date with what was going on in the world. Mr. and Mrs. Poole remained very good friends, and the Kempston's manager was an excellent boss and always put work Lars's way, as he recognised how trustworthy he and Martin were. Lars and Ingrid had a little girl. They called her Elsa, and everyone loved her dearly. She had her parents' colouring, and many people said that there was no doubting who her parents were. When the little girl was beginning to crawl around, she was frequently bumping into furniture, and when she began walking they realised that she had difficulty seeing. She was becoming covered in bruises as she frequently walked into doors and walls. It took a while for Ingrid to accept that Elsa was almost blind. Her eyes were big, beautiful and blue, but they saw virtually nothing, just shadows. "It's because of us, isn't it?" said Ingrid. "We should not have married. Our families told us that, and they were right. They said that any children would not be normal." "She is quite normal, Ingrid. She is pretty, she is bright, she can walk, and she is beginning to talk. She is not mentally retarded. She is anything but that," said Lars. "We will look after her and train her to do things as well as sighted people." "She will be well loved," said Ingrid. "Mrs. H. and all her children adore her, and so do Dave and Shirley. I haven't found anyone who dislikes her. We really should not have more children, but it's too late for that." "Are you having another one then, Ingrid?" asked a smiling Lars, and she nodded, but did not look happy about it. "What if the next one is also blind, or deaf, or is deformed in some way, or mentally deficient? How would we be able to cope with two who have problems?" said Ingrid, who was now crying. "The next one will be fine. He or she will not have a single problem," said Lars. "He or she will be absolutely perfect." Lars had been right. Their next daughter was perfect in every way. They called her Irina. Elsa was delighted to have a little sister to love, and so were Mrs. H. and her children. Life was progressing nicely for both families. Everyone looked after everyone else. They were one large family, and they all worked hard in their own way. Mrs. H. and her daughter worked at a very lucrative washing and cleaning business, and George, Mrs. H.'s second son, had joined Lars and Martin driving and delivering for the Kempston Company. The third boy, Bruce, was not yet old enough to work, but he also wanted to eventually drive and deliver for the company. Lars did not lose his yearning for the land, and he and Ingrid saved all they could to further that dream, although they did not deprive their family of food or clothes to achieve that. Martin informed them that it was his intention to travel with them when they were ready to gain their own land, He liked the idea of farming, and he hoped that he would eventually have his own farm. Lars noticed that he enjoyed looking after the small number of vegetables that they were able to grow up their sideway. Obviously, there was a great deal more to farming than a few vegetables in boxes. But Lars was confident that Martin would learn and eventually do very well. Mrs. H. hoped that they would not be travelling for quite some time, but she could see that New York was not where the Bradleys wanted to be. However, they had achieved a great deal in New York regardless of their real aims. She knew that they would help Martin to also achieve his dreams. It was 1820, and it had been 10 years since Lars and Ingrid had left Norway, and during that year Ingrid gave birth to a boy. He also had his parents and siblings colouring. They called him Matthew, and he was adored by everyone in the household. Elsa especially cared for him. He seemed to respond to her, and she was able to recognise whenever he needed attention. Her lack of eyesight did not stop her feeding and changing him. In fact, she could undertake many tasks that sighted people carried out. Everyone in the household had helped Elsa to have a normal life, and her superb memory made tasks easy for her, although she did not travel very far from home without someone to guide her. By the time Matthew had seen his second birthday, the family's plans were well underway to finally achieve their aim to travel and acquire land in the West. They discussed it in great detail with Kirby, the Kempston manager, who arranged for them to meet 2 of the best wagon train guides who advised them on the safest route to take. "What you need to do is meet up with a large group of travellers," they said. "When you are ready, we can guide you to a near point to join others, and we would suggest those travelling on the Santa Fe Trail. We can also advise on what you need for your journey." It was going to take a great deal of organisation, but everyone was finding it very exciting, all except Mrs. H., who was becoming increasingly sad at the prospect of them leaving. They had wanted her to join them, but her life was in New York, as were 2 of her sons and her daughter. Martin was going with them, and when he was settled, he would send for them if they were interested at that time. "We have been together for so long that I don't know how I'm going to manage without you. We have become family. I'm just thankful that we had so much time together. Perhaps you would consider leaving Elsa with me. It is not going to be easy for her in a new place, and you know that I would look after her as if she were my own. All your family have always felt like mine," said Mrs. H. "I know that you mean well, but we couldn't leave Elsa. She is just as dear to us as Irina and Matthew, and your children," said Ingrid. "You know that we will watch over Martin. He is also like one of our own." Mrs. H. decided that when they had left, she was going to change the top floor back into an independent apartment and rent it out. "Dave and Shirley will help me to find the right people, but it will never be the same without you," said Mrs. H., with a sob in her voice. The day that they were leaving, many people felt a mixture of sadness and excitement for the family. They had 2 wagons, which were well laden with household goods, food, and many seeds and small plants. Lars had hidden their money within the framework of one of the wagons, and it was more than enough to give them a good start when they reached their destination. They were meeting with the Kempston wagons outside New York, and by the time they reached them, much of their sadness had disappeared and had been replaced by a great anticipation of their new life. For the next 4 weeks they travelled with the Kempston wagons, and they found it quite enjoyable. They followed a trail that was not too far from various rivers, so keeping clothes and bodies relatively clean was not a problem. "Part of your journey from now onwards will not have such luxuries," smiled one of the guides. "You are on your own for the next 2 weeks or so, but I have drawn a detailed map for you, and I must emphasize that for a few days you will be travelling in Cherokee country. But they are very friendly people, and they do not have a problem with travellers. However, you must not venture into their burial grounds. It is something that they are very particular about, and if you break that rule you could be in serious trouble." Lars and Martin studied the map in great detail, and they were confident they would be able to make the journey to meet up with the Santa Fe travellers with no difficulty. A week after the Kempston wagons had gone their way, and Lars and his family had gone their way, there was a storm, and as it developed it became one that the family had never experienced before. They managed to make their way to an overhanging outcrop and took shelter for the afternoon and night. The next morning the sun came out and their wagons began steaming, so they decided to take a break and hang out anything that needed drying. It was the first relaxing day that they had had since the beginning of their journey. Having packed up their belongings, they resumed their journey the following morning, and after a couple of days they came to an area which was completely blocked by a rockfall and several very large trees. "There is no way through this. We just haven't the tools to deal with it. We'll have to find a way around it," said Lars. "I think we are quite near the Cherokee burial grounds, so we will have to be especially careful not to get lost and end up there," said Martin. "We have plenty of time to reach the other wagons, so let's stop and think about it and see what other options we have," said Lars. They unhitched a couple of the horses, and Lars and Martin slowly rode them towards the blockage and tried to circle it, but with little success. When they returned, they laid out the plan that they had to continue their journey. "If we travel 2 or 3 miles to the left, then there is just a small amount of debris to move so that we can get the wagons through," said Lars. "Won't that take us near to the Cherokee burial grounds?" asked Ingrid. "Yes, we will be near it, but I'm sure that we will skirt it, so we won't be upsetting them," said Lars. Unfortunately, Lars was wrong, and they realised it when they came through a narrow pass in some rocks and found that they were directly in the burial ground. "We cannot turn easily here and go back, and I'm not sure that there are any other ways through, so we will have to quickly drive towards the river and hope that we will not be spotted," said Lars. "If we are, I'm sure that they would understand our difficulty, as we have a rockfall behind us and no other way to get back on our proper route," said Martin. Ingrid was not as sure, as she had heard that there were no excuses for trespassing onto sacred ground. "If we move quickly, we could leave this place and nobody will have noticed," said Lars. Once again Lars was wrong, as there were many Cherokee eyes watching them, and unfortunately when they turned towards the river, Martin's wagon caught one of the burial platforms, and although it did not collapse whilst they were still there, it did a little while later, making the body it held tumble to the ground. When they finally reached the river, they felt that they had avoided any problems, and they travelled on for an hour or so before making camp for the afternoon. They made a fire and began to organise a meal for the evening. Elsa and Irina were helping, when suddenly there was a piercing cry, and an arrow was fired and struck one of the wagons. Irina screamed and rushed towards the wagons, but unfortunately Elsa was completely lost and crying out for help. Lars ran towards her, but was cut down by another arrow, and then it was Elsa who was pierced in her back. Martin was trying to shield Irina, but both were cut down. Ingrid cried out at the scene of devastation that was unfolding. Her instinct was to push Matthew behind her, although her heart wanted her to go to Lars, who had always been the love of her life. A spear was thrown and caught Ingrid in her midriff. She fell backwards against the wagon, leaving Matthew caught up in her skirt. She looked around, could see that all her family were dead, and she knew that she would soon be gone. Matthew was still wriggling under her, and she prayed that he would stay alive and that someone would come and find him. She wanted to be with Lars, and she put out her hand towards him. It was getting dark, although the sun was shining brightly. She looked up and saw an Indian on a pony, and he was flanked by another Indian. They were watching what was happening, and suddenly she thought that she could see that there was sympathy in the eyes of them both, and she prayed that they would look after her son. As Ingrid died, her son struggled to come from under her body. He was covered in her blood, but gradually he emerged from between her legs and from under her skirt. Both Indians on the horses looked on in amazement, as it seemed as if the boy was being born, and they could not believe the colour of his hair. They had never seen such a fair-haired boy, and they were looking at him as if he was a god. Another Indian was about to scalp Lars, and as he whipped off his hat, He was taken aback by the colour of his hair also. The Indian chief called out that none of them were to be scalped, and slowly he dismounted and moved towards Matthew, and at the same time Ingrid's bonnet was dislodged, and her hair cascaded down, and both the chief and the medicine man gasped. They looked around and saw that the two girls also had such hair. A young Indian was in one of the wagons and was throwing goods to the ground, amongst them the seeds and plants that Lars had so carefully chosen for their new life in the West. The chief called them all to order as he bent down and picked up Matthew, who surprisingly was not crying. He was just staring ahead, and the chief did not realise that he was in shock. Slowly they all moved away, and much as it was never thought that Indians had feelings, they were wrong, because the chief and the medicine man were both sorry and fearful, as they felt that they had mistakenly killed a family of gods. In their culture they revered albinos, and they had never seen a family of them before, although they were mistaken in believing that they were albinos. "We must take very special care of this boy, and perhaps we will be forgiven our error. We must tell our white man to go to the wagons and see what he can find for the boy. He must have something from his past to set him up well for his future," said the chief. "I'm not sure that the white one will want to do that, but you are right that it is essential for our well-being," said the medicine man. "He will probably take his son Banda with him. It is not going to be an easy task." They arrived at their encampment, and the chief carried Matthew into his tepee and handed him to his wife. "He is going to be my son from now onwards, and must be treated with respect." The chief already had a son, who was a little older than Matthew, and the new name of Brave Eagle had been chosen for him. Matthew still was quiet, but he went to Running Bear's wife for comfort, and she loved him more than she did the chief's own son, who could be very argumentative and dismissive of women. The white man was summoned and told to go to the wagons and find something that would be important to the boy when he was older. It was not a task that he wanted, and he took his young son Banda with him. When he reached the site, he balked at the destruction that had been unleashed on such an innocent family. He realised that they had made a mistake by encroaching on the burial ground, but his logic told him that a simple discussion would have been sufficient for them to have passed safely. He found a Bible with all their names in it, and knew that it was all that was needed for the boy to know who he really was, and he and Banda left the place as quickly as they had arrived. Later that evening some of their scouts came into camp with the news that a pathway out of the area was severely blocked by a landfall, and nothing could get through without crossing part of the burial ground. This news preyed on Running Bear's conscience, but he could show no weakness to his people. However, he began to realise that what they had carried out could have repercussions, and he gave instructions for the camp to move to their summer grounds to the south. "We must move by tomorrow," he said to the medicine man. "It will not be wise for us to stay here. It will be a while before those wagons are found, so we must make use of the time that we have to protect ourselves." It was unusual for them to move at that time of year, but nobody argued with the decision, for although the chief and medicine man showed no fear, many realised that what had been carried out that day would invoke the wrath of the white man, and once or twice they had seen what that could mean. The whole camp began to move the following day, and they were well out of reach by the time the Bradleys' massacre had been discovered. Just before the Santa Fe wagon trains were due to leave, the Kempston scouts rode up to wish the Bradleys well on their trip to the west. They went to the wagon master and asked where their wagons were. "They haven't yet arrived," said the man. "We can wait another couple of days, but no longer, as we want to be over the mountains before the winter sets in." "They should have been here weeks ago," said the scout. "I'm a little concerned, and can only hope that they have broken down somewhere along the way. We'll go back and see if we can find them, and get back to you as soon as possible." "I hope they didn't stray from the trail," said one of the scouts. "I have a bad feeling about this." When they reached the site of where the Bradleys had been killed, they were horror-struck by the scene of devastation. The bodies were still there, although the weather and animals had done their work. The two men cried as they dug graves and laid the family to rest. They could see that the wagons had been ransacked, but they knew where Lars had put his money, and that was still intact. "All we can do is take this to Mrs. H. and let her do with it as she wishes," said the scout. "It is bittersweet that all their seeds were scattered, and they are now growing well here. It will be a lasting memory of them. I don't know where the little boy's body is. I suppose it has been carried off by wild animals. We had better tell the wagon master that they will not be joining him. That family was so well prepared and so full of life and plans for the future," said one of the men. They returned to the wagon train and informed them of the situation, and then they joined their own Kempston wagon train and slowly made their way back to New York. It was going to be a very sad return for them. Kirby was in the Kempston offices when the wagons arrived at the dockside. As the two scouts came into the office, he could see that something was wrong. "What's the matter?" asked Kirby. "Your wagons seem well laden and in good condition. What has happened?" "It's the Bradleys. I'm afraid that they are all dead. They must have strayed off the path and ended up in the Cherokee burial ground. They were all massacred. We found them a while after it had happened, and we laid them to rest. We have their money here. We thought that it should go to Mrs. H. We must also tell her that her son is dead," said one of the men. "I'll go and see Dave and Shirley Poole, and perhaps they will help with breaking the news to Mrs. H," said Kirby. "I'll take the money, but I know that she will think of it as blood money." Mrs. H collapsed when told of the Bradleys and Martin's deaths, and she did think of the money as blood money. But Dave and Shirley said that they would put it in their safe and leave it there until she could think of what she would like to do with it. The Bradleys had been a popular family in New York, and the feelings of the people in the town were very strong against Indians. There had always been a certain amount of mistrust, but now it was open hostility. Mrs. H carried on with work. It kept her busy, but she never lost the sadness that she felt for those that she considered her family. Matthew settled in well with his new Cherokee family. He now thought of Running Bear as his father and his wife as his mother. Running Bear's other wife was Brave Eagle's mother, and she also cared for him very kindly. However, Brave Eagle treated him like an annoying younger brother, but he did on occasion teach him how to shoot arrows and catch small animals. When he had been with them for a couple of years, they had a naming ceremony for him, and from that day he was known as White Wolf, or Unaga Waya in the Cherokee language. He never mentioned his previous life. In fact, he had no memories of it. On many occasions he asked why his hair was different to others in the tribe. His father told him that it was because he was special to the tribe, and as time went on he would realize why he had been singled out for such an honor. Everyone in the tribe treated White Wolf with respect, as they knew that albinos were very special people. Some did wonder whether he was an albino, as his only claim to it was his remarkable fair hair. He had no other signs of such a condition. White Wolf became the leader of most of the young boys. He enjoyed the rough and tumble of their games, and often came away bruised and bloodied, but he had no complaints, as he was not the only one to suffer for the sake of attempting to win. Although Brave Eagle was entrusted to help with training White Wolf in all forms of Cherokee weaponry, he grew to dislike his brother, especially as White Wolf became even more proficient than he ever could be. Brave Eagle found that he had strange feelings towards his brother, as he was proud of what he was achieving with his help, but that also created a feeling of jealousy, and on some occasions it was hatred. White Wolf and his father, Running Bear, became very close, and that was another reason why Brave Eagle's hatred of his brother was growing. And Brave Eagle even tried to hold his temper in check, as he knew that he should not have such feelings, and that if he showed that hatred to his father, he would be disowned. He was next in line to be chief, and he was looking forward to that time when he would rule his tribe and make the Cherokee nation one to be feared. The years were passing, and White Wolf was growing into a very handsome young brave, and many a squaw looked at him with interest in their eyes. Their fathers were keen for their daughters to become part of the chief's family, but White Wolf did not feel ready for marriage. The only one that he thought he could spend time with was his mother's niece, Little Dove, but she was very young, and he knew that he had plenty of time to make up his mind on it. His brother, Brave Eagle, was already married, but his wife did not appear to be very happy with the arrangement, and his brother was considering taking on another wife. But most of the girls seemed to try to avoid him, and White Wolf could only think that it was because they could see the bruises that often showed on Brave Eagle's wife. He and the white man's son, Banda, got on very well, and White Wolf learned a great deal about tracking from him. They would go out for days on end and see what they could find. It was a way of learning and fun at the same time. Banda and his father often told White Wolf that he had another name and what it was, but he brushed it aside, although the name Matthew Bradley stuck in his mind, and he did wonder about it. However, the chief was insisting that White Wolf learn some of the English language, and he instructed Banda's father to carry this out. "We have no wish to lose our ways or our language, but the white man is encroaching more and more, and it would be better if we knew how they talked and what they wanted. It will help us in the future. You are my son, and we need someone in authority to be able to speak for us," said Running Bear to White Wolf. White Wolf would have preferred to just continue learning tracking and hunting, but he understood what was being asked of him. He was also learning a great deal from the medicine man, and his father wanted him to learn more towards the spiritual side of learning rather than fighting. But he was strong enough to look after himself in a fight. As time went on, Brave Eagle was showing further signs of disliking him, and he never missed an opportunity to ridicule him. But sadly for Brave Eagle, it did not affect White Wolf or anyone else in the camp. White Wolf put Brave Eagle's aggressiveness down to jealousy, as their father had always appeared to concentrate on White Wolf's future rather than his brother's. Around the campfires, the stories often touched on the legend of the one with green eyes and how she would be the saviour of the Cherokee people. The story had been handed down for generations, and each time a girl child was born, they hoped that she would have those green eyes, and they would then be moving into times of plenty. "If the green-eyed one is with us soon, then she will become part of our family," said Running Bear. "The legend does not tell us when she will be with us. It may not be in my lifetime, or indeed my sons, or their sons. We have been told that she will be with us, and our medicine man feels that it will be soon." Banda now lived between two worlds, and on many occasions he scouted for the army and for certain wagon trains which mostly carried goods rather than pioneers. He was often asked to scout for the Marchant and Fuller delivery wagons, which sometimes travelled to the Valdez cattle ranch in Texas. Marchant and Fuller had taken over many of the Kempston deliveries, and they were increasing their business quite considerably. The wagons always had a man called Cole as the wagon master, and he was assisted by a rather gruff man known as Jack. What their surnames were, nobody bothered to find out. Meanwhile, around the campfires in the Cherokee camp, there seemed to be more talk about the green-eyed saviour. The medicine man had very strong feelings that she would soon be with them, and once again every child born was studied closely, although sometimes the colour of their eyes could not be assessed until they were some months older. Running Bear was still trying to persuade White Wolf to find a wife, and still his only thoughts went towards Little Dove. She did not know that White Wolf had any thoughts in her direction, and she was only around 12 years old at that time, but no other woman came into his mind, although many a family tried to encourage ideas of marriage between their daughters and the chief's son. White Wolf was now over 21 years of age, and his previous life never came to mind. Banda's father had died, but had left the Bradley Bible with the medicine man, who may one day have to tell White Wolf exactly who he was. Normally, when children came to the tribe and were adopted, they did not have anyone who would encourage them to know their past, but both Running Bear and the medicine man felt that it was important to at least have some record of White Wolf's past. Banda rode into camp one day with the information that there was a woman on the Marchant and Fuller wagon train who had the most outstanding green eyes. She was heading towards the Valdez cattle ranch, and it was not long after that time that Matthew Bradley, now known as White Wolf, and Liza Marchant began a very close association. For a few days the wagon train was watched from afar, And then late one afternoon it was decided that Running Bear and the medicine man would visit when the wagons had made camp for the day. Slowly several of them moved into the camp, and immediately many men moved in front of two women to protect them. Cole went forward and a heated conversation took place, the outcome being that the Cherokees were in the market to buy one of the women. Of course they were told that they did not sell women, although the Indians argued that they did, as there were many women held as slaves in several places in the South. "Well, we don't sell our women, and there is nobody here that you are looking for," said Cole, and after a while the Indians left camp, and Cole told Liza Marchant and Kate Templar that they must now stay out of sight inside the wagons. "It will be for the best, and we will put extra guards on tonight." Back in the Cherokee encampment, the only conversation was about the woman with the startling green eyes who was travelling near them and would be for the coming days. Banda had said that she would be staying at the Valdez Ranch for some weeks, so they would have ample opportunity to see her and bring her to them. White Wolf was a little cautious and asked if they were sure that she was the one. He had not seen her, as they had kept her well hidden when they had visited the camp. "Is she really the one? Does she have the eyes that you think she does? She is a white woman, and I thought that the right one would be one of our own," said White Wolf. "If she is the one, then she will be one of us. She will join us and live with us, and we will have times of prosperity. But you are right that we must be sure that she is the one," said the medicine man. "We will try to see her again when they travel tomorrow. We will watch the wagons and get close to them," said Running Bear. "I am surprised that you are considering a white woman to be the one for us," said Brave Eagle aggressively, "but we will see what happens tomorrow. I must go and spend some time asking the spirits what must be done, and I'm sure all will become clear to me," said the medicine man. The next day several of them approached the wagons, and Cole told them once again that they did not have anyone with them of interest. Slowly the braves rode past each wagon, trying to see what they contained, but both Liza and Kate stayed out of sight. They were a little apprehensive, but had confidence in Cole, Jack, and the other drivers to keep them safe. Slowly the wagons continued on their way, but always under the watchful eyes of many braves. Banda continued to scout for the train, which eventually arrived at the Valdez cattle ranch. After a wonderfully relaxing evening at the Valdez ranch, Cole and Jack made ready to leave the following morning. But before they left, Liza came running out of the hacienda to say goodbye to Jack, who was sitting ready to drive the first wagon away. As she looked up at him, the sun caught her eyes, and they flashed with a most unbelievably green-coloured light, which made those around gasp with surprise, and not least Banda, who was watching nearby. The wagons left, and shortly after they were on their way, Banda disappeared from the train, much to Cole's annoyance. "That's strange, as Banda has been so reliable. I wonder what he's up to," said Cole. What they did not know was that Banda now truly believed that Liza was the woman of the Cherokee legend, and he had to make his people aware of that fact. He had every intention of telling them how the light had flashed in Liza's eyes and had stunned all those around her. He now had to let his people know that they must find a way to bring her to them, and he felt that it would have to be by force. Liza and Kate were enjoying their time with Miguel and his widowed son Jorge at the Valdez Ranch. They spent time riding and picnicking during the days, although there were occasions when it was not felt wise to go from the hacienda, as fences were cut quite often. Jorge and Miguel were concerned that it could be something that the Cherokees were carrying out. Discussions were continuing in the Cherokee encampment, as it was understood according to legend that the special woman would be joined with the chief's family, and the medicine man was spending many hours seeking answers from the spirits about which of the chief's sons should marry the woman. Finally the day arrived when it was felt that they must take the woman. The fences had already been cut, and the Indians watched as two men came to mend them. Brave Eagle quickly and lethally dispensed with them. Liza, Kate and Jorge had been watched by the Indians for a few days, so they knew the route that they often took on their daily ride. And there they were coming into view. Jorge was first to notice the two men lying on the ground, and as he went towards them, he shouted to Liza and Kate, not to go near to them. But before he could finish his sentence, he was struck by an arrow and fell to the ground. White Wolf was surprised at the speed that the ladies reached the man and tried to shield him from any further injury. He had a vague memory of somebody shielding him in the same way, but he could not quite bring it to his mind. He was also amazed at how the one with the green eyes tried to protect the other woman, and in doing so she had grabbed one of the tools that was strewn on the ground and hit out at Brave Eagle, who was making his way towards her. She knocked him unconscious to the ground, but in the attempt she fell and hit her head, and she too became unconscious. Indians were not known to show amusement, but White Wolf could see that Brave Eagle would not be pleased that he had been knocked to the ground by a woman, and a small smile crossed his face at the thought that his brother's injuries had been caused by a weak woman. White Wolf looked across to where Cherokee was lying. He could have ordered his death, but he decided to leave him alive, as once again a memory was stirring, and he felt that to attack someone who was already near death was not a brave thing to do. The two women had rushed to protect the man, so there had to be a good reason for that. He knew that it was lucky that his brother was not capable of making any decisions, for if he was, then the man would be dead by now. Seeing the bodies of the two workers and Cherokee lying there was making White Wolf uneasy. He felt that he had seen something similar before, but he could not remember when. Brave Eagle had to be helped onto his pony, much to his enormous annoyance, and White Wolf put Liza onto his pony and Kate onto her own horse, and they all rode quickly away, leaving Cherokee lying injured. As they disappeared, Cherokee staggered to the one horse that had been left and managed to mount it. His own horse had already run away and was making its way back to the hacienda. Cherokee then slowly followed in an attempt to get help for Liza and Kate, but he was badly injured, and as he approached the hacienda, others had been alerted that there was a problem, and they were on their way to help. It was now that Liza's and Kate's long-term ordeal began. They did not have many problems when White Wolf was guiding their party, but Liza nearly lost her life when Brave Eagle took over and put her through the most torturous time of her life. Brave Eagle's hatred of Liza increased as time went by, due to the laughter of those around the campfires as the story of her knocking him unconscious grew each time it was told. To be hurt by a woman was unacceptable to him, and he showed his temper not only to Liza, but to anyone who dared to cross his path. As Liza was nursed back to health, Kate disappeared, and Liza was distraught that not only was she now alone, but she was very fearful for Kate's future. White Wolf spent many hours watching those who came and went to Liza's tepee. He had already saved her from Brave Eagle's viciousness, and he was very concerned that his brother would make another attempt on her life. He had been told that either he or his brother would be married to her, and he decided that it was going to be him. The medicine man was the one to seek the spirit's help to decide, but White Wolf was going to say that he had already been with the woman and therefore would lay claim to her. It could result in severe punishment for him, but he felt that it would be worth it. The medicine man finally came to a decision, and it was a very simple one to make. Both he and the chief knew that Liza would not survive for very long being married to Brave Eagle, so the obvious choice was White Wolf. They both had to admit that they had made the decision because they needed her to survive, and although they had both asked for spiritual guidance, logic had really found them the answer. Liza's health was improving, and she was being nursed by Little Dove and her mother. Only the chief medicine man and White Wolf were allowed to view her progress. She always asked where Kate was, but they appeared not to understand her. She was, however, beginning to understand some of the Cherokee language. She also knew that her Cherokee name was Itsidikata, which apparently meant green eyes. The highlight of Liza's day was being allowed to walk a little way to the stream to wash, but always accompanied by either Little Dove or her mother. Both White Wolf and Banda watched her closely, as it was their task to keep Itsidikata safe. It was becoming obvious that preparations were being made for some significant event, and Liza wondered whether it had something to do with her, as she knew that they thought that she was someone special. She was very fearful of what would happen to her when they discovered that she was not who they thought she was. Liza knew that Banda spoke English, so she approached him and asked what all the preparations were for. "It's for White Wolf's wedding," said Banda. Liza looked at him with concern and asked, "Who is he marrying?" Banda scowled at her. "You have been chosen, of course," he said dismissively. "That can't be right," said Liza. "I'm already married." "I know that there is no reason why you cannot marry," said Banda. "I don't want to marry anyone," said Liza desperately. "It is arranged. You have no choice, and White Wolf will make a good husband. Besides, it is written that you will marry," said Banda, and he walked away, leaving Liza staring after him in dismay. For the next 2 years, White Wolf protected his wife from the excesses of his brother, who never missed an opportunity to physically hurt her. Running Bear and the Medicine Man frequently made Brave Eagle aware that Liza was someone to revere rather than hurt, but mostly it made no difference, as he was still laughed at behind his back regarding his being rendered unconscious by Liza. White Wolf knew that Liza accepted him as a husband, but that her feelings towards him did not match his own towards her, and there were occasions when he felt that there was someone else in their tepee, although he could never see anyone. It just added to the knowledge that she was special and was visited by those who had passed over. The tribe were constantly on the move. Whenever they heard that searches were underway for white captives, they packed their teepees and went to another area, or if it was too late for that, White Wolf made sure that Liza was well hidden from prying eyes. There were occasions when Liza thought that she could get away, but always she was found, brought back and punished for it. "Where were you from?" Liza asked White Wolf one day. "I have only known my people, although Banda's father told me stories of a past that must have been mine," said White Wolf, who could now speak a form of English. Liza had mastered the Cherokee language, but she preferred to speak in English, as she did not want to accept that she was going to live permanently in any Indian camp. "There is a book that the Medicine Man has which is mine. I don't know what it is, and I don't think that I want to know," said White Wolf. "You must ask to see it, and I would tell you if it's important," said Liza, which eventually he did, and with great care it was brought to Liza. White Wolf was out hunting at the time, and Liza had the opportunity to study the Bradley family Bible. She learned the original name was Brandvold, but soon after their arrival in America it became Bradley. Lars and Ingrid's parents were not mentioned. The family names in the Bible had started with Matthew's parents. The names listed as their children were Elsa, Irina, and Matthew. So Matthew had 2 sisters, thought Liza. I wonder what happened to them, and to his parents. She would ask Matthew when he returned. "Have you never asked about your family?" Liza asked Matthew on his return. "Running Bear is my father, and Brave Eagle my brother. I know no other family, and I do not want to," said Matthew with annoyance. "What is it that you are looking at?" "It's your family Bible," said Liza, and she realized that he did not know what a Bible was. "It's a religious book in which the names of family members are written," said Liza. "You must have known that you were not born Cherokee. You must have realized that your family were white." "No, I am Cherokee. I was born with a special purpose and with special colouring. Such people as I are put here for a reason. We are not white," said Matthew. "I think you are talking about those known as albinos. You are not albino. You would look different to both white people and Indians. You are white through and through, so you should know what happened to your family," said Liza. "Be quiet, you are wrong. I am Cherokee, and Running Bear is my father," said Matthew, and he started to move away. "Who is your mother, then?" shouted Liza. Matthew stopped and stared at her, as he could not answer her question. He did not know who his mother was. All he knew was that his father was Running Bear, and his brother was Brave Eagle. "You had 2 sisters, called Elsa and Irina, and your parents' names were Lars and Ingrid. Your last name was Brandvold, which was changed to Bradley. You are Matthew Bradley, and you should find out what happened to your family," said Liza. Matthew was about to grab the Bible from Liza, but she held on to it. "Running Bear and the Medicine Man have carefully kept this book for you for many years. They obviously felt that it was important to you, so either you let me keep it carefully, or you give it back to them for safekeeping. The choice is yours." Matthew stormed out of the TP without another word, and Liza decided that she would find out exactly what had happened to Matthew's family. She did not think that she would get the answer from Running Bear. The medicine man could perhaps be persuaded to tell her, but she felt that the best person to get any information from would be Bandor. Bandor was away from camp for several weeks, and in the meantime Liza had returned the Bible to the medicine man for safekeeping, as she was not sure that Matthew would appreciate how important it was to him. On Bandor's return, Liza approached him respectfully. She informed him that Running Bear and the medicine man had trusted her with the Bible, which she understood he and his father had obtained for White Wolf, and which he should find of interest. "I am surprised that you were entrusted with such an important possession," said Bandor dismissively. "They knew that I would be able to read it, which I have done, and felt that I would like an answer to a question which only you may be able to tell me," said Liza. "You can ask, but I may not wish to answer," said Bandor. "I think perhaps you will only be confirming what I have surmised," said Liza, and Bandor frowned as he did not seem to understand what she was saying, and he grunted for her to continue. "It is obvious that White Wolf's family were killed. Can you tell me how and why?" asked Liza. "You should ask Running Bear, not me. He would have told you if he had wanted you to know," said Bandor sharply. "He would not have given me the Bible if he did not want me to know about White Wolf's family," said Liza. "It is not easy for me to approach him, and he would not accept questions from me, but he did arrange for me to have the family Bible. Perhaps White Wolf's family were not killed, and they may have been looking for him for many years." Bandor looked closely at Liza for some time, which unnerved her, but she stared back at him and waited for a reply. "They crossed the boundaries of our burial grounds and damaged remains. It was what you would call sacrilege. It was something that demanded reprisal," said Bandor, and Liza had the distinct impression that he did not agree with the decision that had been made all those years ago. "I see," said Liza carefully. She was appalled that a whole family could be wiped out. So all were killed apart from White Wolf, even the little blind girl. "How do you know one was blind?" asked Bandor. "Because it says so in the Bible," said Liza. "Births, deaths, marriages, and other details are written in family Bibles." "On the day that the woman died, White Wolf was born. Our chief and medicine man saw it and claimed the boy as a son," said Bandor. "That's impossible," said Liza. "White Wolf's birth was entered in the Bible. His name was Matthew Bradley, and he was born some time before his mother died. It's written, and of course his mother could not have written it if she was dead." "Our chief and medicine man do not lie," said Bandor harshly. "Maybe not, but what they saw was not Matthew's birth. They must just have thought that it was, and you know that I would never accuse Running Bear or the medicine man of lying," said Liza. "Thank you for helping me in this." Bandor grunted and moved away. He had obviously been uncomfortable answering her questions, but remembered that his father had said how important the book was to White Wolf, and he had also insisted that White Wolf knew that Matthew Bradley was his real name. There were times when Matthew thought about what Liza told him of living in the white man's world, and he had to admit that sometimes it did appeal to him. But then he dismissed the idea and carried on with life as it was. Liza had told him that she could not understand his loyalty to people who had killed his entire family. But as he could not recall his white family, his only response was that he had been cared for by the Cherokee people, and he was one of the tribe. "They killed your mother, your father, and both your sisters, one of whom was blind," said Liza with some annoyance. "Blind? What do you mean blind?" grumbled Matthew. "It's simple enough," said Liza. "Not only did your so-called caring tribe obliterate the whole of your family, they also were cowardly enough to cut down a defenseless blind girl. I really don't know how you could be so loyal to them." "You don't know what you are saying. Who told you this story?" asked Matthew, who was getting increasingly annoyed. "Your family Bible told me so. It listed all the family names and gave some details of each of them, and your older sister was called Elsa, and she was blind," said Liza with equal annoyance. "You know that Running Bear and the medicine man wanted you to know about your past. They knew that I would be able to tell you. They felt that it was important for you to know, and they probably thought that you will be able to help them in the future, as I know that they are concerned that the settlers and soldiers would try to take the land. I believe that they think I will also be able to smooth the way so that the Cherokee heritage is not lost." Matthew was looking at her, as he really did not fully understand what she was saying, but he remembered that Running Bear had said that he should learn the white man's language, as he would be needed to talk to them. A few weeks passed, and Liza noticed that quite often either Running Bear or the medicine man seemed to have a question on their lips, but she was not going to make it easy for them to approach her. Matthew came into the tepee one day and told her that she had been summoned by the chief. She looked a little fearfully at him, but he just gruffly told her not to keep the chief waiting, and she followed him over to the tepee. When she entered, she was surprised to see the medicine man sitting there, holding the Bradley family Bible. Although Matthew could now speak in English, he was not able to read the language, and Running Bear wanted to know what was written in the book that belonged to White Wolf. Liza respectfully asked to approach, and when permission was given with a nod, she moved forward and sat between the chief and the medicine man. White Wolf was sitting opposite them. Liza gently took the Bible from the medicine man and opened it. The main sections of the Bible are stories by several followers of Jesus Christ telling of his life. Other sections tell of Christianity prior to the birth of Christ. They are quite long, and I find them sometimes a little difficult to follow. I would be quite willing to read them to you, although much could be lost in translating into your language, said Liza. Does any of that tell us about White Wolf? Asked Running Bear. There are pages in the front of the Bible which are written by family members, making a lasting record of who is in the family, and also something that may be relevant to each person, said Liza. What does the book say about White Wolf? Asked the medicine man. Although Liza had managed to speak and understand most of the Cherokee language, she was finding it a little difficult to communicate exactly what had been written by someone in the Bradley family. White Wolf's previous name was Matthew Bradley, said Liza, and both the chief and medicine man nodded. His parents were Lars and Ingrid Brandvold, and they were from a place a long way away called Norway. But soon after they came to this land, they changed their name to Bradley. They lived in New York and had 2 daughters. First was called Elsa, and unfortunately, she was born unable to see. The second daughter was Irina, and she had no such impediment. When they had been in this land for around 10 years, they had a son, and they called him Matthew. It was also noted in the Bible that each member of the family had fair skin, blue eyes, and very blonde hair. Banda has mentioned to us that you have said that White Wolf could not have been born on the day that we saw him born. We saw him come from under his mother, said the chief. You may have seen him coming from under his mother's skirts, but he was not born on that day. He was born 2 years earlier than that. You must have noticed that he did not look like a newborn baby, said Liza. Both the chief and the medicine man looked annoyed at the information, and Liza felt that she could have overstepped the mark with them, so she decided to say no more unless asked. Perhaps they had another son who was not with them on that day, said the medicine man. The Bradley massacre, as it is called, is well known, and had been discussed when I was on the journey to the Valdez Ranch, and whilst I was there. It was talked about because people had caught sight of White Wolf and realized that he was possibly the small boy that could not be found when the bodies were discovered. It had been assumed that wild animals had taken his body. Those on that journey were Lars and Ingrid Bradley, their 2 daughters, Elsa and Irina, and their 2-year-old son called Matthew. They also had a young man with them, but I don't know what his name was, said Liza. All this is in the front of the book that you call a Bible, said the medicine man. Only their names, their dates of birth, and a brief description of each of them, and there definitely was no other son in that family, said Liza. Does it not say who the other man was, said the chief. Not in the Bible, as he was not a family member. I am trying to remember what I have been told, and all I seem to think is that he was the son of a neighbour, who also wanted to start a new life, said Liza, and she had the good sense not to add that wanting a new life had not got him very far. White Wolf suddenly stood up, and he had a look of fury on his face, and he indicated that Liza should follow him. I do not want to know any of this. I am your son, and I am Cherokee, Isidikata, and I will bring prosperity to our people. Isidikata has already done so. We have had more food than in previous years. Hunting has been good, more children have been born and are healthy, and our young men are strong. All this has happened since she came to us, and since you married, said Running Bear. Other tribes no longer try to take what is ours. They have become frightened of the power that we have. The white man is getting closer to us, and we need you both to speak on our behalf, as you understand their ways, said the medicine man. We have kept White Wolf's book carefully all this time, as we knew that it was important. Perhaps it is time for you to have it now. No, I do not want it. I do not wish to have anything to do with it. You are my people, not the white man, said White Wolf. You have kept it well for all these years, said Liza to the medicine man. Perhaps it would be better for you to keep it safely for a little longer, but if I may, I would like to look at it occasionally. Both the chief and the medicine man nodded, and Liza followed White Wolf from the tepee. Liza did not see White Wolf for the following 5 days. He had gone hunting. He had said nothing to her, but he had obviously been upset by learning of his origins. She was always on edge when he was away, as Brave Eagle never missed an opportunity to harm her, and White Wolf was her protector. She often wondered why White Wolf felt confident leaving her, as he knew that she would take any opportunity that arose to get back to her previous life. But she had a feeling that Little Dove's brother always guarded her. Whenever he was away, Liza always spent a great deal of time with those women that she considered her friends. And the main one was Little Dove, but she noticed that recently Little Dove was keeping her distance from her. She asked one of the chief's wives, who was Little Dove's aunt, if she had upset her in any way. No, Isidikata, it is nothing that you have done. Brave Eagle has made it known that he wants her as his third wife, and it seems that her family has no choice in the matter, she said. That is terrible. He will make her life a misery. It's all my fault, as it's because he knows that she is my friend, and he's not doing it to hurt Little Dove. He's doing it to hurt me. But she will be the one to suffer, and it will be very badly, said Liza, who was almost in tears. I have questioned it with my husband, but he says that it is Brave Eagle's choice, and also her father's choice, said the woman. I believe her father feels that it is an honour for her to marry the chief's son. He has not seen further than prestige. She is my niece, but I can do nothing to help her. If her father wants her to marry into the chief's family, perhaps I could persuade White Wolf to marry her, said Liza. That could solve the difficulty. Brave Eagle will be the next chief, and that is better than White Wolf's position, said the woman. She will be dead in no time at all, said Liza, who was now openly sobbing, and it's my fault. Perhaps you could make the suggestion that she marries White Wolf instead to the chief. It is not your fault, Isidikata. It is not our place to question what happens within a family. I know that you will not say anything, but the fault is Little Dove's father's. Her mother is not happy with the situation, and your suggestion about White Wolf has been put to both her father and my husband, without success, said the chief's wife. We must be able to help her in some way, said a desperate Liza. I am surprised that you have made the suggestion of a second wife for White Wolf. I would not have thought that you would have agreed to that. And I know that White Wolf wants no other wife. He may appear gruff on occasion, but you are the only one that he wants, she said. To help Little Dove, it is a perfect solution, and I know what White Wolf thinks of his brother's treatment of his current wives. I'm sure he would understand the reasoning behind his having a second wife, said Liza. I will suggest it again, but I'm not hopeful, said the chief's wife. By the time White Wolf returned, Little Dove and Brave Eagle had been married, and Liza and those in teepees nearby heard the screams of pain that came from Little Dove on her wedding night, and on many nights afterwards. Whilst White Wolf was away, he spent a great deal of time thinking. He would ask Banda what he knew of his origins, but his thoughts now were of his relationship with Isidikata. He wanted no other wife. He wanted to spend the rest of his life with her, but sadly he realized that the life that they had together was not the one that Isidikata wanted or deserved. He knew that no matter how much he wanted her, and no matter how much she attempted to care for him, she would never be happy, and she would always take every opportunity to get back to her previous life. She had already tried it on a few occasions, and took her punishment when she was brought back to him. Most braves believed that their wives wanted the lives that they had, but he had always thought differently, and even more so since Liza came into his life. He had begun to think of her as Liza, and she now always referred to him as Matthew. He wondered if he would be able to settle into a life in the white man's world, but it was somewhere that he had very little knowledge of, and realized that he would probably never be able to adapt. Banda had mentioned to him once that Itzy Carter's life had been very different. She had houses and businesses that she was responsible for. She did not have to cook and clean for her man. She had people to do that for her. So it was obvious why she was such a terrible cook. He had stopped chastising her for the meagre and burnt offerings that she produced for his meal, and frequently he ate in his father's tepee. He smiled at the memory of some of the food that she served up to him. Such meals began to amuse him, and he knew that there were many smiles on the faces of others when they saw what she was preparing for his meal. He wondered how she was surviving, as her food was hardly edible. He had noticed that she was interested in learning herbal remedies, and those she was becoming quite expert with, so perhaps she was beginning to accept that her life was with him and with his people. It was a hope that he really did not believe, and all he could do was hold on to her for as long as he could, and maybe that would be a lifetime. He spent another couple of days hunting, and then Bandor found him. "Have you been sent to find me?" asked White Wolf. "Yes, our chief felt that it was time for you to return," said Bandor. "Your brother is making life difficult for your wife. She is handling it well and keeping out of his way as much as possible, but your presence in camp keeps Brave Eagle at bay." White Wolf frowned with annoyance. "Surely he takes notice of our father, and I know that Little Dove and her brother watch over her." "Little Dove is now married to your brother, so there is nothing that she can do to help. She has enough to do looking after herself," said Bandor. White Wolf looked at him and shook his head. Bandor was the only person that he talked to openly and said exactly what he thought. "Why would he want to marry Little Dove? She is a child and hardly prepared for marriage. She and Itzy Carter have become very good friends. I suppose that is why my brother wanted her. He will not only hurt Little Dove, but it will also hurt my wife, and he knows that. It is not my business, and I must not make it so. My wife will, though, and that will be very dangerous for her. I must return and make sure that she does not try to interfere in any way," said White Wolf. "Running Bear and Little Dove's brother are watching her closely, and I believe that our medicine man is also making sure she is safe, but it is not their duty to do so. It is yours," said Bandor. "Yes, I must make sure that she does not try something foolish, and also she may try to leave us again," said White Wolf. "Why did you leave her alone if you were concerned?" asked Bandor. "I had some thinking to do, and that was impossible in the camp," said White Wolf. "You have seemed concerned since you saw the book," said Bandor. "It has created many questions in my mind," said White Wolf. "Is it true that it was your father who found the book?" "I was with him when he did," said Bandor. "It was not a time that I wish to remember." "You must have been very young," said White Wolf. "Can you not tell me about it?" "It will do no good to bring it back to my mind," said Bandor. "I prefer to forget." "I need to know if what I think is true. Were all of my family killed by my people?" asked White Wolf. "And was one of the young girls blind?" "They went into our burial grounds and damaged one of our dead. It was an act that our people could not let pass without reprisals," said Bandor. And White Wolf could see that it was not an action that Bandor thought was right. "I do not know if one of the girls was blind. My father did not take part in their killing, but later he was asked to get something that he knew would be important to you in future life." "So it is true that my people killed my true family," said White Wolf thoughtfully. "It has been regretted since, which is why you were cherished by our chief and all in the tribe. You appeared to be born that day and are revered as special to us," said Bandor. "Have you not felt that you are part of us?" "I have been treated well by all in the tribe," said White Wolf, and then he smiled and thought perhaps his brother was the exception. I was not born on that day. I was born sometime earlier." "How do you know that?" asked Banda. "Because it says so in the book, as it also says that one of the girls was blind," said White Wolf. "I do not know why she preys on my mind so much, as a short while ago I had no idea that she ever existed. But she was my sister, and such a young girl would have had no control over where she travelled. She would not have been able to see where she was being taken. Her life should have been spared, as her younger sister also should have been allowed to survive." Banda did not comment, as so often he remained silent when he agreed with criticism of his chief. It was his way of managing to live in two worlds. "I will talk to my father about it," said White Wolf. "I must now return." Liza breathed a sigh of relief when she saw Matthew arrive back at the encampment. He looked across at her and just nodded to her as he went to his father's tepee. She was surprised, as normally he came directly to their tepee when he had been away. She watched Banda make his way to his family tepee, where he was looked after by his mother and aunt. Since his father had died, he was the man of the household. Liza wondered why he had yet to marry, but assumed that it was because he spent so much time away scouting for some wagon trains, and also for the army. It was not long before someone scratched on Liza's tepee, telling her that she was to join the chief in his tepee, and Liza wondered what she had done wrong, as she was always breaking the rules. With some trepidation she scratched at the chief's tepee, and a grunt told her to enter. Inside, the medicine man was holding the Bradley family Bible, and gruffly he told Liza to tell him what it said. Liza looked surprised, and said that she thought that they knew what it contained. A look of annoyance crossed all their faces, so she decided to just take the Bible and assumed that they wanted her to read the names and details written. Again she told them of Lars and Ingrid's date of marriage in Norway, their arrival in America in 1810, the birth of Elsa, and when they realized that she was blind, also the birth of Irina, and finally when Matthew was born in 1820. "It says that a daughter could not see," said Running Bear. "It does. She was the eldest child of the family, but she was probably around 10 years old when she was killed," said Liza, but without the recrimination that she really felt. "She would have been treated as special within our tribe," commented White Wolf. "Of course we did not know this. Those who do not see in this world see much in the future," said the medicine man. "We must seek spiritual guidance on this." Liza looked at them in surprise, and then annoyed them by asking what good that could possibly do, as the girl was dead and had been for many years. Although Liza had mastered the language, what was said to her with a certain amount of fury was lost on her, but she felt it prudent to leave the tepee, as a slap could be forthcoming. Whilst White Wolf had been away, the trader, Ambrose Cutler, had visited again. He had been previously and had given Liza a small scissor set, and had intimated that he may be able to get some writing paper and ink for her. He would also try to forward her letters to the appropriate places. On his second visit, he had been true to his word, and Liza's letters were on their way to Jorge and Miguel Valdez and to Henry Mahoney in New York, to be forwarded to the Fullers in Belfast. Liza's heart was pounding when White Wolf joined her in their tepee after seeing the chief and medicine man. She prayed that Ambrose's help had not been discovered, but it seemed that White Wolf was still more concerned by the fact that he was related to a dead blind girl. His unease was very noticeable, and Liza tried to assure him that the chief and medicine man had taken responsibility, and there was nothing that they were able to do about the past. A few days later, a piercing scream could be heard coming from Brave Eagle's tepee, and he could be seen striding away and leaping on his pony and riding off. One of his wives was rushing towards the chief's tepee, and the other ran towards where Liza was standing, and much to her surprise, she was being implored to come and help. It was with horror that Liza found that Little Dove's face had been cut from ear to mouth, which was normally the sign of an unfaithful wife. Nobody seemed to know what to do, especially as his wives realized that if they helped, the same fate could befall them. Liza took over the situation and gently led Little Dove to her own tepee, and getting some of the covers rolled back to give more light, she carefully cleaned the wound. Little Dove's mother was going to use a large bone needle, but Liza stopped her and with her mother's and aunt's help, Liza slowly stitched Little Dove's face together using the small needles in her new scissor set. Little Dove's aunt, who was the chief's wife, was mixing a herbal potion which would take some of the pain away. Liza remembered being given such a medicine when she had been hurt, and knew that Little Dove would be able to sleep for some time. She should go back to her teepee, said Little Dove's mother, although it was obvious that she knew that her daughter would be hurt again. She's not going back there, said Liza adamantly. She stays here until she has healed, and her stitches can be removed. Brave Eagle would not like that, and he will drag her back. It is his right, said Little Dove's aunt. It was not his right to cut her like that. She has not been unfaithful, and even if she had been, she should not be cut in that way or in any way. She stays here, and that's final, said Liza, and neither lady argued with her. White Wolf was surprised to find Little Dove resting in their teepee, and he also said that Brave Eagle would not be pleased that she was not back in his teepee. Liza turned on him and told him that he had better keep Brave Eagle away from them, as she was looking after Little Dove until she was fit. She also suggested that he went to his father and told him to discipline his other son before he did something that endangered the whole tribe. Little Dove stays here, said Liza fiercely. White Wolf realized that he needed his father's help to calm the situation, after which the medicine man visited, looked at Little Dove, and pronounced that she would be unable to move for some days. Everyone in the tribe liked Little Dove, and rules would be bent to make sure that she was looked after correctly, and all believed that being with Liza was the way to achieve that. Brave Eagle was furious that once again this woman had outsmarted him. He was definitely going to make her pay for her interference. Liza felt sorry for his other wives, and she prayed that they did not end up in the same state as Little Dove. One of them was pregnant, and she hoped that he would be cautious of that fact. The chief's wife spent a great deal of time in Liza's teepee, and during that time they mixed several concoctions of oil which would smooth Little Dove's face once the stitches had been removed. They talked quietly through the days that Little Dove was healing, and Liza learnt that the chief was very unhappy at the way that his son, Brave Eagle, was behaving. He felt that any aggression should only be shown to their enemies, and not to those within their own tribe. But a time may come when that aggression could be necessary if they were ever attacked. The medicine man looked into the teepee each day to check on Little Dove, and much as White Wolf preferred to have their teepee to themselves, he appreciated that Liza must look after Little Dove until she had to be returned to her husband's teepee, and he knew that Liza was bringing forward all sorts of excuses to keep her with them for as long as possible. On one of his visits to his father, Running Bear asked if Little Dove was still with them, and when told that she was, Running Bear said that it was time that she was returned to her husband. White Wolf grunted his agreement, but the medicine man intervened, commenting that she would soon be dead if she was returned now. "It is a husband's duty to discipline a wife," said Running Bear. "It is not a husband's duty to kill his wife for no reason. Brave Eagle must be told to be less harsh with your niece," said the medicine man. "You know that Itzy-Decata will try to protect her, and she will then be harmed by Brave Eagle." "I will protect my wife. It is not your place to worry about her. It is mine," said White Wolf. "I will tell Brave Eagle to be more cautious with Little Dove. We cannot have Itzy-Decata placed in any danger. She is important to us," said Running Bear. Finally, Little Dove had to return to Brave Eagle's teepee, and although her life was not easy, she was now being treated marginally better. The whole encampment was on the move again, and they moved northwards and settled in one of their other campsites. The hunting was good, which White Wolf found enjoyable. He and Brave Eagle competed at it, and both always excelled. It was one of the few times that they found that they had a great deal in common. There was a gathering of all the Cherokee people from various camps, and at that time Liza was commanded to the chief's teepee. When she arrived, she was dismayed to find all the lesser chiefs assembled, along with the medicine man, White Wolf, and Brave Eagle. It was overcrowded, and within a very short while Liza felt quite faint. White Wolf realized and hoped that she would remain upright, as it would be insulting if she were to collapse in front of all the chiefs. Running Bear began to sing Itzy-Decata's praises, as since she had been with them, hunting had never been better. They had managed to gather enough cereal to keep everyone in food. The people had been healthier than ever before, and many children had been born and survived. They now had a strong and healthy tribe, and it had only happened since Itzi-Dikata had been with them. She was someone to be cherished and protected by all their tribe. There were grunts and nods amongst the gathering, except, of course, for Brave Eagle, who sat stony-faced. The chief continued that it was time that White Wolf produced a grandchild for him. However, Liza had other ideas, but within 2 months she found that she was indeed pregnant. White Wolf spent a great deal of time watching Liza. He had realized that she was probably pregnant, but presumed that she was not telling him because she wanted to be sure of her condition. It also appeared that Running Bear and the medicine man thought that she may be carrying a child, and they knew that she needed protecting more than ever. The smaller tribes had left, and life seemed to go back to normal, until one day there were shouts and cries from the women who were working near the stream. There were whoops and sounds of ponies being ridden through the water and off into the distance. Some of the Cherokee braves had been away hunting, and those that were left found that the Pawnees had abducted 2 children. A couple of the squaws had been hurt trying to stop the children being taken. The braves were brought back from their hunt, and plans were made to go and teach the Pawnees a lesson, and not only get their children back, but take captives in reprisal. White Wolf strode back to his tepee and put on his war paint before gathering his weapons. It was the first time that Liza had experienced men preparing for war, and it frightened her. "I suppose there is no point in asking you to remain here," said Liza quietly. White Wolf frowned and stared at her. "Of course I must go," he said, but he stopped short of saying that she was foolish to ask. He could see how concerned she was for his welfare, and it pleased him that she was showing that she cared for him. "I will return," he said, and he smiled at her fondly. "Take care, Matthew. It is not only the Pawnee that you must watch out for. There is another who does not like you," said Liza. "He is my brother, and it would be against all our tribal rules for any of us to hurt one another," said White Wolf. And he left the tepee, went to see his father, leapt onto his pony, and rode away with the rest of the braves. What White Wolf did not know was that Liza was frightened that her life would be in danger if he did not return. They caught up with the Pawnee before they could reach their encampment, but they managed to keep out of sight until they could establish where the children were, although they were expendable. A lesson had to be taught that nobody encroached on any Cherokee camp, and the Pawnee would learn the hard way that Cherokees were more powerful than any other tribe. Plans were made, and the Pawnees did not know what had hit them. It was a hand-to-hand battle, and the children had the good sense to find a place of safety, as they knew that in such a battle neither side would notice if they were in the way. It was a short and sharp battle. White Wolf was slightly wounded, but it was only a glancing blow. The children were gathered up, and the braves began to make their way back to the encampment, which would take some days to reach. White Wolf and Brave Eagle were the last to leave the area, and Brave Eagle offered to find the healing leaf for the cut that White Wolf had on his upper arm. "It is nothing," said White Wolf. "I have had worse during our games." "No matter, your wife will complain if a wound is not cared for properly," said Brave Eagle. "She is good at complaining where wounds are concerned." White Wolf grunted and thought it strange that Brave Eagle was being so caring, and wondered whether his father's words of caution had had a result. He felt exhilarated after the battle, and was looking forward to returning to their camp, and especially to Liza. He moved to his pony and made sure that the animal was watered at the nearby stream. His care for his animal made him a little careless, although he did not feel that there was any further danger. It was with a great deal of surprise that he felt a pain in his back. He turned slightly, and knew that he had been stabbed, and then saw Brave Eagle raise his arm ready to hit him with a large stone, and he realized that Liza had been correct, and that now all the danger was from the Pawnee. As Brave Eagle brought the stone down on his head, White Wolf started to say that Liza had been right, but all he could say was "Liza," and from that point onwards all went black. He could hear, see, and feel nothing, and no memories came to him, nor did any further thoughts. Brave Eagle began rolling him towards the stream, hoping that he would be washed away. but he heard his name called by one of his braves who had returned to find him and White Wolf. So he jumped onto his pony and rode to join him. "Where is White Wolf?" asked the brave. And Brave Eagle said that he had seen him fall, and that he was dead and had been washed downstream. "We must find his body," said the brave. And Brave Eagle said that it was best that they leave, as they must return with the children, and they were near Pawnee territory, but they would return with more braves to find him. The brave argued, but was commanded to leave by Brave Eagle, and as Brave Eagle was the chief's son and would be the next chief, he had to be obeyed. But he was not happy about leaving without the body of the chief's other son. The first that anyone in the camp knew that White Wolf was dead was when Brave Eagle rode back to the camp, strode into Liza's teepee and dragged her out and attempted to pull her towards his teepee. Running Bear shouted, asking what he thought he was doing, to which he replied that White Wolf was dead and he was therefore claiming his wife for himself, as was the custom. Liza shouted that they needed to see his body before they knew that to be true, and Running Bear and the medicine man agreed with her. The other braves were gradually arriving back with the children, and Running Bear asked them how it had happened. None of them could say, as they had only seen White Wolf with a slight wound, nothing more. "Until his body is brought back, we cannot be sure that he is dead," said the medicine man. "One of our braves can go and find him," said Brave Eagle. "No, you are the only one who knows where he died, so you must be the one to bring him back to us," said Running Bear. Most Indian women mourned their dead very noisily, but Liza was so frightened that she was rendered speechless. She knew that without White Wolf she would soon be dead. She would now have to try to escape as soon as possible. Picking herself up, she shakily made her way back to her teepee and looked around at whatever she could see that would be useful to her in her bid to get away. She had never managed it before, but with White Wolf dead and Brave Eagle away, perhaps now she would be lucky. She heard Brave Eagle shouting for some of the braves to join him in finding White Wolf's body, and they quickly rode out of camp. A short while later, Little Dove's aunt scratched at her teepee and asked her to visit with the chief and medicine man. She wondered whether they were going to take her into the chief's teepee as their way of protecting her. But she was wrong, and surprisingly they told her that she must leave them and go back to her own people, as it was important that she had survived, and that it was foretold that one day she would return to them. They had made arrangements for her to be smuggled out of the camp, and that she was to meet up with Ambrose Cutler, who would take her to safety. She was handed some money that they had acquired on some of their raids, and told her to go to her teepee and wait there for Little Dove's brother, who would guide her to the arranged meeting place. Little Dove came to keep her company while she waited for the camp to quieten and the time to come for her to leave. All went according to plan, and finally Liza gained her freedom. Brave Eagle and his few braves rode hard to reach the place where he had left White Wolf's body. He was surprised that it was not there, and his pony was also missing. He could see tracks that showed that several people had since been there. He found it impossible to believe that White Wolf could be alive. The blows that he had inflicted were so severe that nobody could survive such an onslaught. Brave Eagle felt that White Wolf's body could have been swept downstream, and they followed the flow for some miles but found nothing. They then followed the trail of whoever had also entered the area, and on the way they could see no sign of a body or grave. They went back to the place where Brave Eagle had said that he had seen White Wolf fall, and they searched even further downstream, but still could find no sign of him. So Brave Eagle decided that they should return to camp, where he would lay claim to Itzi-Decata, and he was looking forward to making her life a misery. He was not going to kill her, he was just going to hurt her and make her suffer in so many ways. At last he was going to get his revenge. On his arrival back in camp, his fury knew no bounds when he found that Itzi-Decata had disappeared, but he made it clear that he would never rest until he found her. But he was thwarted in that also, as it appeared that she had died whilst making her escape. It would be many years before Brave Eagle realized the truth, and in the meantime Liza had settled and made a good life for herself in her beloved town of Benson. The continuation of this story can be found in the first of the Liza Marchant series, For All Time. It would be appreciated if you could like, subscribe and share this early years short story channel.